Recently, I revisited AFL Premiership 2007 on the PS2 for the first time in at least 10 years, and probably only the second time since 2010. And to be honest, I actually had a lot of fun. For many of us, this game received a ton of playtime over the years, as while we had a new game every year from 2003 to 2007, this game was really our only major release from 2007 until Big Ant's first attempt with AFL Live in 2011. I mean, AFL Challenge on the PSP was released in that 4-year period, but the less said about that, the better. So let's first talk about the actual gameplay itself. And look, if I'm being totally honest, this is a bad game from a gameplay perspective. I knew that back in 2007, and it's even more obvious now, but strangely enough, I still had a lot of fun playing it. These PS2 era games have a strange charm to them that kinda helps you overlook how bad they actually are. Something a lot of AFL games have struggled with is winning the ruck being overpowered. If you had the taller ruckman, it usually became pretty easy to dominate the game, but that's not really the case in 2007. Now, I don't think that's because the ruck systems are well balanced. It's mostly that the game is so clunky that your hitouts hardly ever go in the direction you're intending them to go. But that at least makes the game somewhat of a contest. Something that is overpowered is the smother. Basically, how smothering works in this game is you move your player close enough to the ball carrier and they automatically smother the kick. The good thing about that is that it's OP for both you, the player, and the AI as well. But this is an area where you do learn to accommodate for the clunk, and you realize that to get a kick away, you've got to be in a fair bit of open space. Some aspects of the gameplay that I did like though were the missed tackle animation. If you go for a tackle and you mistime it, your player sort of reaches out but misses, and that would be really handy in AFL 23, as I know a lot of players get frustrated when they press the tackle button and your player seemingly doesn't respond. In reality, you've mistimed the tackle, but as there's no animation for it, you feel like the game is just unresponsive. Similarly, in AFL 2007, you can actually tackle players without the ball. So again, if you mistime your tackle and go too early, you can tackle the player before they've picked up the ball, which sounds like it could be chaotic, but it actually works quite well and rewards the player for timing tackles properly rather than just mashing the tackle button. I also love how snap kicks work in this game. For whatever reason in AFL 23, snap kicks on the run are a different button press to a standard kick, and they don't really work how they should, whereas in 2007, the only way I can explain it is that they just feel natural. If I want to kick a straight drop punt, I'll hold the stick relatively straight. If I want to kick around the body, I'll push the stick to the side, and the game does a really good job of knowing what kind of kick you're trying to pull off. Let's talk about game modes in AFL 2007. The first I want to talk about is mission mode, where each team has their own scenario, usually based on an iconic grand final or finals win, and the challenge for the player is to jump in at a specific point in the game and try and get the win for your team. A pretty standard mode in sports games of the PS2 era, but one that has kind of disappeared from modern games. AFL Evo 2 did have a similar sort of mode, but that was more about creating your own scenarios. But still, to have a create a scenario mode combined with the academy tools of AFL 23 would be pretty awesome. You could create an iconic grand final with accurate playing lists, Guernseys, logos and stadiums, and then share it online for others to play through. But really the core of AFL 2007 is the career mode, and it's got a decent amount of depth to it. The menu screens are laid out magnificently. You've got your calendar as the main screen with all your upcoming games and training sessions for the next month, and special themed rounds such as Anzac and Heritage Round get a little special treatment here when those games roll around. The training system is really cool. Not only does it allow you to set a specific type of training program for your team, but you can also set separate programs for individual groups of players. Not only does this game have injuries and suspensions throughout the season, but these actually happen mid-game. Throughout a match, you might see a red or yellow cross appear above a player. Red means a more serious injury, while yellow means a lighter injury, and in some cases, players can come back onto the field from a yellow cross injury. To add to the realism, commentators will also discuss these injuries and give updates on the player. In one of my games, I had Pavlich go down with a serious injury. Not only was I now down to 3 players on the bench for the rest of that game, I also found out after the match that Pav was out for 6 weeks. A few games later, I had Chris Tarrant get injured and he was also out for 6 weeks, so in the space of a few games, I'd lost my 2 key forwards and now had to manage for at least 4 weeks with Ryan Murphy and another young player as my key forward options. In addition to this, players can be reported during a game. I had Byron Shammer get reported and later cleared, and a few games later I had Des Headland get reported and I had to appeal to try and get his 3-week ban lowered to 1 or 2 weeks. Little challenges and curveballs like these throughout a season are a crucial part of any sports game and are sorely lacking in AFL 23. A new feature for AFL 2007 was the player editor tool. While you couldn't create new custom players or teams, you could take an existing player and change their name, number and appearance. which really meant that this was the first time in an AFL game that we had some form of customization to create either ourselves or even legends from the past. The great menu layouts continue into the end of quarter menus. These give you all the standard info you'd expect, such as scores and statistics, but it also allows you to press a button and go to the team setup screen, which is so well laid out that it puts every game that followed it to shame. From this one screen, you can clearly see your team lineup, who is playing on who, which players are injured, the current stamina levels of your players, and you can even set tags for any player in any position on the field. It really makes you wonder why every AFL game since this one has struggled with this concept when this game did it so well. Back at the quarter break menus, and you can also press a button to view your current tactics, with each tactic having a pretty lengthy write-up about what it does. I never really got this deep into the tactics back in the day, so I don't really know how much of an effect they actually have on gameplay, but it's nice to have the option. I've got to take a moment to talk about the dynamic weather system in this game. This game is pretty ugly from a graphics point of view, but the weather system is really cool. My first game was played at Subiaco Oval in blue skies and bright sunshine. My next game was against the Cats at Gardenia Park in pouring rain. The sky was filled with dark clouds, the wind was blowing, and by midway through the game, players were covered in dirt and mud. These might seem like small details, but this game was so atmospheric and really felt immersive. A few games later, I played Collingwood at Subi. The game started with rain falling, and I figured it was going to be another wet weather game, but midway through the second quarter, I noticed the clouds had brightened a bit and the rain had actually stopped. The next two quarters were played in dry conditions before the dark clouds started rolling back in the fourth. And while it didn't start raining again until after the game had finished, it did start misting, and you could tell more rain was on the way. Dynamic weather and dynamic time of day lighting, like we saw in Evo 2, are small details that add so much realism to these games. And in the case of AFL 2007, this isn't just a visual change. The game is actually harder to play in wet weather, so a game like that one against Geelong was a real four-quarter slog, while in the Collingwood game it actually became easier to move the ball quickly and score once the rain dried up. I'll also give a shout out to the info bar that appears mid-game, which gives updates on statistics, including which players are doing well, and even tells you the crowd numbers for that particular game. And of course, I have to mention the selection of retro Guernseys. The first time we've had this in an AFL game, and I'm sure this game played a large role in my love of Guernsey designs.